Thank you very much, Andres. And I would like to open the section on questions and comments and questions and answers with a brief thought regarding the absence of religious-based and faith-based violence in Latin America and the Caribbean. Maybe Ambassador and Barthelemy can share some thoughts. Is this because of the historical roots, the migrations, the homogeneity of the religious cultures in the region? If you have any thoughts on that before I open it to the public. Thank you.
Well, having served in Argentina, Argentina was victim of one of the worst terrorist attacks in the Western Hemisphere, the attack on the Jewish Community Center, the AMIA, in the 1990s. So, but that violence was, I think, organized from outside of Latin America. There were Iranian diplomats implicated in that. But there have been incidents of violence, desecration of Jewish cemeteries, and things like that. But you're right, not in at the magnitude of what has happened in Africa and in other places. I just think it's a different tradition, a different culture. Latin America did have its share of violence during the colonial period with the, of course, the demise of the indigenous population due to the harshness which they were treated by the colonial masters and disease and other things. So, but you're right, there is a lot less violence. There's no strong extremist movements. There are Islamic populations, but they're not as violent as in other parts. So, anybody else has anything there?
I share the same opinion. I believe that in Africa we still have very strong traditions. Most of our societies are still under the weight of traditional religion. That's why the violence seems to be predominantly from those structures. So we don't have big modern societies like in Europe or United States or in Latin America. So I believe with time when Africa will open up to the global world, when they'll be able to share the ideas, probably societies will move from a traditional understanding of life to a different setup. So I think maybe the understanding and even the motives for violence might shift. So the experience of Africa, as I said at the beginning, is that we don't have a pool of scholarly studies about violence and religion. It's there. The media talks about it. But these are instances that we find across the continent. But we need serious studies done that are credible, that we're able to say this is exactly. For instance, in my talk, I could not give you statistics because they are not there. We have only a few countries where we have statistics. But as a whole, for the whole continent, it's difficult. It might take time. I still believe scholars have to do a lot of work in that field. So that's why the African experience is a little bit different from other continents.
Thank you, Barthelemy. Andres?
Yeah, just briefly, I think a lot of, in Latin America, for example, a lot of the more recent and modern work of religious communities has been to address a lot of the social inequalities and problems that occur. So as an from an institutional perspective, some of the church organizations have been, even within them there are differences, but some have been very keen to highlight some of the social problems that affect the different populations. And to that extent, that is related less to violence. Historically, if you look at it, the ethnic cleansing that has occurred in the Americas is much earlier. So it occurred already. It was cleansed already. So it's more homogeneous right now. And that's why perhaps you don't see it as you see it in other regions. But from the perspective of the modern work of institutions, I think a lot of the work of the Catholic and Protestant religions, but also many other institutions, is focused on the development or the addressing social problems.
Thank you very much. And I would like to take some questions. Please, James, If you would begin.
Thank you very much. It was a great panel. Ambassador Gutierrez, it's a rare treat that we have someone with your experience here to talk with us. And I think it's clear that diplomacy is a powerful tool. So I wonder if you could give us, and this is a tough question, and I realize you're not responsible for the decisions made by our government and others in regards to these issues. But Arturo described a situation involving the U.S. border in which nobody seems to benefit on either side of the border, and cries for some sort of diplomatic solution. There seems to be some sort of solution that would be to the benefit of both countries. How? And I realize, are we so immobilized by our politics that that's not possible? How would the State Department, how would we begin to think about a diplomatic solution that could address some of this violence that occurs?
Well, I agree with you. There's no more important bilateral relationship than with Mexico, I think, because I think our largest embassy is Mexico City. The number of people who travel that border every day is tremendous. Trade, Mexico is one of our top 2 or 3 trading partners of the world. We have NAFTA now. We've gotten closer. Since the presidency of Clinton, there are bilateral meetings every year, not only between the presidents, but between people, ministers or cabinet secretaries. So there's constant communications. There are a lot of ghosts of Christmas past around. Of course, the beginning of our relationship in the 1840s was not the best. I'm sure Mexican school children are reminded that California, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona were once theirs, and things like that. So there has been, Mexico has viewed the U.S. with a lot of suspicion for many years. And cooperation was a long way in happening. But there have been programs in recent years. There's a lot of police cooperation, but there's also the whole sovereignty aspect that prevents us from doing more. The problem of weapons, I think U.S. agencies are trying to help, but they're hamstrung by the Second Amendment. You cannot tell a Texas gun shop to close down. You can't tell the Texas legislature to pass laws that make it more, to get more information. I mean, I think some progress has been made in this, but there's still, there's still a lot of, we're not a dictatorship. We have a federal system where the states play a part as well. It's not all about the federal government. But I think the more we talk, the more we discuss our mutual problems, I think incremental progress has been made, and we continue to do more.
Before asking Michelle for her question, I would like to comment on this question because we have a very interesting example with California and the rest of the border states, James. California, without changing or even tackling issues of the Second Amendment, is a very good example of how they are implementing existing regulations regarding background checks, regarding straw purchases and mechanisms to control those. And they're extremely effective. Very few weapons are coming into Mexico that are originated from California, as Daniel Webster showed yesterday. So the rest of the states could follow that motion and follow that suit in order to control the sale and trafficking of new illicit weapons, and such things could happen across other states without messing with the Second Amendment. Could I ask Michelle to please continue?
Thank you, and also fantastic panel. I have one comment and one question. So the comment goes on the potential role of diplomacy, and obviously, for those of you who know my background, I'm also a huge believer in the power of diplomacy. And I would say I feel like we have a moment ahead of us now in terms of the development of the next post-2015 Millennium Development Goals, where there is a lot of discussion about including some violence indicators across the board. And those are things that the public health community globally hold themselves accountable for. And I just want to make a plea that everyone from their particular position, if you're at all involved in that, we need to really very vociferously advocate that violence indicators be included because, as you know, what gets measured gets done. A second question, though, is to Father about the African context. And I have kind of two questions. And I must admit, I was a little bit prompted by the In the Minds of Men, knowing the role of gender inequality in terms of really promoting violence in a certain way. And also the growing evidence that witnessing interpersonal violence as a child is really kind of a key part in the life cycle of violence. And I'm just curious from your perspective, how the issues of violence and gender inequality are linked, and this whole question of disciplining children. And if we look at those kind of triumvirate of issues, you know, how it might seem. And I do, last point, I just want to say that the three saints were included in Safe Magazine as heroes this year. So we're really in awe of their work, and I'm thrilled to hear that you were able to support them. Thank you.
That's a very good question. As I said earlier, the African soul is intrinsically religious. To be able to change those firmly held beliefs, you need to replace them with something substantial. And most African countries, religious setup, communities do not have a good exposure with other beliefs, other ways of doing. Some who had the chance to go to school maybe see a different way of doing certain things. So they have to understand that what they are doing, especially when we are talking of institutional violence that is embedded in the structures. A very simple example. It's believed that when a kid steals an egg or eats an egg, it's not good for him or for her. So they do everything, and we know that kids need eggs. But all people will be eating eggs or maybe big piece of meat, because if they steal, if they eat, they are going to be thieves. Such beliefs. And in villages, people take it for granted. But if they have the chance to hear other ways of doing, slowly, and tell them there is another way of doing it. Women, in many cases, they even agree that it's normal, gender-based violence. It's still believed in some communities, if you don't beat your wife, you don't love her. And they are ready when they are beaten, yes, my husband loves me. You know, such kinds of beliefs. So I think they can change through education, that they are taught, and slowly to dialogue with leaders of traditional religion, that your way of doing is not good. This is what you propose. You cannot just come and say, from now on you cannot do it. It will never work. So it's a long process, even in my training, in my work with some of them. When I go to villages, we sit, we discuss, and we say, okay, you've been doing this way. Why don't you do it the other way? For instance, we could do it this way. And someone will say, okay, yeah, it makes sense. So, and I believe with time, the continent is changing because the pace is really fast. You go to Africa, even in villages, there are many people who have 1, 2, 3 mobile phones. Some people who don't even know how to read and write, and yes, they have a phone. So I believe there is hope. But we need ourselves to start tackling some of those issues and be able to talk about them and confront our cultures and be able to say, these have been values for so long, but now things have changed. And women themselves to start joining the fight, because they cannot sit back and expect men to do it, because those who benefit from those structures are men. So the women should stand up, and I believe the international community should contribute to dialogue with those cultures and to be able to propose something new that will be able to uplift those communities.
Thank you, Barthelemy. I have five people who want to ask questions in this order: Rowell, Evelyn, Bridget, a guest in the back, and Sheldon. So if you can please be very brief, we have 10 more minutes for questions and answers. So please, Rowell.
Actually, I don't have a question. I just wanted to make a comment on the border situation. Arturo last evening said he hoped he wouldn't offend people with the indictment of the United States about the guns going across the border. And Arturo, I'm sure you didn't, because what you spoke is the truth. And it embarrasses me as an American citizen. And what I'm going to say now is not as a professor or scientist, and certainly not a representative of the University of Michigan. It's an individual citizen. This is a political problem, a major political problem. We just had a Surgeon General who was barely confirmed because he had said that he thought gun violence was an important issue. If you look at the vote, one Republican voted for his confirmation. Every other Republican voted against it. Russell Kirk of Illinois voted for it. Every other Republican voted against it. There were 3 Democrats who voted against it. Heitkamp from North Dakota, Manchin from West Virginia, and Donnelly from Indiana. I think we need to try to defeat these people. This is the only way policy is going to change. The NRA and the gun lobby has such an influence in American politics. And there are Democrats who abstained. Barbara Boxer abstained from California. Why didn't she vote? I don't know. It infuriates me and it embarrasses me, but I have to say Hispanic Americans should be even more embarrassed. If they'd come out and voted in the same proportion they voted when Obama was up for election, the Senate would still be Democratic, almost certainly, in the next election. So, you know, there's a way people concerned about Latin America can change this situation by voting for the right people. And I hope they will. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Rowell. Evelyn?
Thank you. An energized researcher is a really good researcher. Was what I will sum up that passion for is. And I was really, it goes to my question of, you know, we've talked about how do we connect the research to community, what we know, what we need to know more about. And so one of the reasons putting together this panel was really how to help make that and transfer that out into community. I love how your slide talked about the culture of citizenship and really engaging us in our community and in change. And all the speakers really spoke about connecting with people and community. So I guess my question would be is how do we help? Yes, how do we help? That helps. Get the information, the research into a community, and how can we help community inform researchers in terms of what is needed to make change that we know could work?
Thank you for the question. It's really important, and it actually goes directly to some of the activities that at the World Bank, for example, we're doing in collaboration with institutions like USAID and many other institutions, both national in different countries, as well as multilateral. One of the tasks that we have, and it's a big task, is we work with a lot of countries, and we work directly with decision makers in countries, but we also work with communities. So we work at different levels, from municipalities all the way to national governments. And to that extent, we get a lot of information, a lot of requests, and some understanding of what the problems are. On the other side, we also work with professionals like, you know, all the audience that is present here and the wider audience that knows or has some information, not only in the United States, but in different countries. So one of the tasks that we have is actually to link, to identify where those needs are, and to link them to those people who know how to address some of the problems, and try to foster those connections. So that's, and create sort of a type of community of practice of individuals that know how to do something and that can contribute to intervene in a particular area that has a very specific need. So that is one strategy. But that strategy is not only a strategy of communication and of engagement between two or more parties. There's also, that needs to be also enhanced with fostering the promotion of further evaluations of studies, of interventions that might be incredibly creative, but that are not readily evaluated. That needs to be tied with capacity building. There's a huge need for capacity building in the entire region. And so all these strategies need to occur somewhat simultaneously. The role of institutions like the IOM, which fosters at a very high level knowledge and promotes a lot of the state-of-the-art knowledge, is really important in a sense that teaming up with institutions that have activities in the field is really crucial to actually engage and facilitate this type of communication. So from that perspective, those linkages at the institutional level are important, but also at the level of communities, of being able to actually engage some individuals who we know have done interventions that work and that could potentially have incredible benefits in other areas, but are currently not being done. So that type of activity, I think, is a very powerful strategy, a strategy that we promote, and not only as the institution that I work for, but many other institutions are working at that level. We need to engage from an institutional and professional perspective even more. I think this is a good start, but it needs to go much, much further along. Even within the institutions that work in the U.S., for example, the activities that USAID does internationally are really important and can benefit a lot, and can be, I think a lot of the activities that are done here in the U.S. can benefit other countries through those institutions too.
Gracias, Andres. We have a couple of minutes for 3 more questions or comments. Bridget, if you could help us, please.
Quick question for Dr. Villaveses about the role. I wonder if there's some learnings from what the World Bank did around the HIV/AIDS epidemic in terms of bringing collaboration and financing that brought global awareness of that to one of the things that we're struggling with in the violence prevention arena, which is how to get the global attention and really get it in a higher position on the agenda. Could you comment on the World Bank and its role in bringing HIV/AIDS forward, and if there's some lessons for us from that?
Unfortunately, I didn't work at the World Bank when this happened, so I don't know a lot about what it did at that point. One thing I can tell you is that in regards to violence prevention, the World Bank is a bit of a latecomer. But internally, there's a lot of work that is going on to actually mainstream the prevention of violence into a lot of the projects that the bank is doing. To the degree that it finances a lot of interventions in multiple areas, then those activities are going to be, the violence prevention activities are going to be benefited from that extent. And to a certain degree, that I believe is something that was done in the case of HIV. It's actually channeled through different programs and financed by the bank, addressing the issue of HIV, got the view that it got. But further than that, I wouldn't know what to say.
Thank you very much. And I would ask you to be very brief. We have a minute left before we go out to lunch, please. If you can introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Susan Cruz. My question is for Andres. As a clinician, Andres, what recommendations do you have for Latin American countries in terms of dealing with mental health? Recently, the BBC published an expose of the terrible conditions in the Guatemalan psychiatric hospital. I don't know if you saw that. Well, as a clinician, what recommendations do you have to improve access and delivery of care for people with mental illness? Thank you.
Wow, it's a huge question. I don't have the time to answer it properly, indeed. But I think creating the environments for young populations, for kids to grow in nurturing environments is really key. From that perspective, creating that type of environment has benefits that are long-lasting for life. Now, that from the institutional perspective, there are a lot of issues that relate to human rights, to actually the rights to health of people, et cetera, that need to be addressed at an institutional level with particular relationship to mental health issues. It's insufficiently spoken about, so I think it needs to be highlighted further. I don't have any more time but we can talk further about that.
Thank you. We've been given by the higher authorities a couple more minutes, so you could please, we'll take Sheldon Greenberg's question.
I don't know if you'll have time to answer this, and maybe you'll choose not to. In regard to the broad issue of violence-related problems you've covered, to what degree does distrust in or fear of the government, the national and state governments, inhibit people from engaging in solving their own problems?
I think we've run out of time. No, just kidding. Ambassador, please.
No, that's a key question because you have to have faith in something. And, you know, if you don't have faith that your government is out there to help you or your local court is there to help you, then you seek a solution elsewhere. And that's one of the big problems in Latin America is a lack of an independent judicial sector where citizens can expect a fair hearing. Corruption is very endemic, and in some countries you pay the judge, whoever has the most money. And the same with the government. The government's tax collection is very low because many citizens think if my tax money will go into the pockets of those who govern me. So it's all about, you know, building institutions that are sustainable, that are fair and impartial, and that is a big problem. You have to gain the trust of your government, of your people, if you're the government.
And I would add, if I may, that this trust in police and trust in government is fundamental to move forward. However, look at the striking figures in Mexico. 75% of all citizens fear of insecurity within their state. And of all the 33 million crimes, there's a 93% black figure, which is not reported. These crimes are not reported because of mistrust of the police and of the authorities in charge of prosecuting criminals. A lot of kidnapping, more than 135 kidnappings happened over the last years, and they are not reported to authorities because of the mistrust. But I would argue that the arms trade and the arms trafficking and the empowerment that this is providing to the drug trafficking organizations is feeding into this vicious cycle of distrust of the authorities because of the incredible corruptive power of drug trafficking organizations. The recent murder of 43 students in Ayotzinapa, their kidnapping and their murder, was orchestrated from the municipal palace, from the government of that town, who was corrupt and had dealings with the drug trafficking organizations. The police force was completely involved in these issues. There's discussions that the military and the federal police could have intervened because they knew about it and they didn't. So this mistrust in police and mistrust of government is certainly something that is harming our societies, but the whole cycle of arms trafficking is just providing it more fuel.
From an African perspective, we could say that there is more and more a feeling that Western culture vis-a-vis African culture, there is a clash. Some do believe that we have a good culture that we want to preserve. We have values in the Western cultures, but we should find homegrown solution. For instance, when we take the whole issue of Al-Shabaab, they say what Western culture is an aberration. So they will do everything to destroy something that has a Western connotation. For instance, we talk of restorative justice. From an African perspective, you can go wrong. But for the harmony of the community, we'll try to solve the problem. The wrong is not good. You belong to us. So it is the responsibility of the community to take care of you. So we'll find a communal way of handling the issue. So more and more scholars are talking about homegrown solutions that could help reduce the violence. If it is basically because they are reacting against Western culture, what will be the answer to those questions? But if deep down in our beliefs, there are issues that are not good, how can we handle those issues and find solutions? So the issue of violence as lived and experienced in Africa is still being thought about to find ways, especially when it comes from the local culture. We need to address it, and I think the solution will come from the Africans themselves. But they haven't started doing it thoroughly, so I believe that we need to start doing it. Otherwise, we'll have many victims before we start reacting.
Thank you very much to all our panelists, and I would ask you to help me thank them with an applause, and then we can break for lunch. Thank you very much.